Hi guys, I'm going to split this into two separate lessons. I'm going to do each question separately, and then we'll post this on YouTube. All right, so whoopsie, what was the first one you did? And you can see that I changed some of the colors in here for these SAQs to try to point out a few things. So the first thing that you want to pay attention to in an SAQ are the trigger words, the keywords, whatever you want to call them. Usually they're going to be either identify and describe, and then there'll be an explain. These words mean different things. You have to remember that. Identify and describe generally means, right, point at a specific item. And usually they're using describe a lot more than identify and give some general characteristics of it, right? Describe what Mr. Summer is wearing doing this. Mr. Summer is wearing a brown sweatshirt with a red t-shirt underneath and a pair of ASU shorts on that are maroon and gold, right? That is a description, right? If we were to explain, you would need to say how and why, right? Mr. Summer is wearing these things because number one, he is not going to see many human beings today, so he doesn't care what he looks like. Right? In addition, he is wearing ASU shorts because that is where he went to school and he loves to wear the clothing of his alma mater. Right? Hopefully you can hear the difference there. You cannot ignore those words because trust me, the readers of SAQs do not ignore them. Right? We know what they mean. We know what we're looking for. All right, so if we start here with A, identify one economic benefit that colonial territories derive from imperialism. I'm going to do A, and when I get to B and C, I'll do those as well. All right, so I made economic green because economics money. Right, so the first mistake that people make with these is they tell me about political, social, or cultural benefits. Right? It says economic, it has to do something with the transaction of goods, with money. It can relate to government actions, but it has to, at the end of the day, be about an economic transaction. The second thing I want to point out to you in this and all of them is, if you look, the question is structured around a thinking skill. I believe it's important for you to understand what thinking skill the question is asking you because it will help you answer the question. So if you're going to identify one economic benefit that colonial territories, we'll get to that in a second, derived from imperialism, this is a cause and effect relationship where the cause is imperialism, right? And you are looking how colonial territories, places like India, colonial territories in Africa, right? Territories that have come under the power of a Western European imperialist nation, right? And how they benefited, right? That were good, at least in some way, right? It doesn't have to be across the board benefit. It can be a certain group of people that have benefited from it, right? But it is a cause and effect. So you have to really identify how imperialism led to this. Right? I'll just jump to these two as well, and you'll see these are all cause and effect, right? How imperialism contributed to global migrations in other ways, in other words, right? How did imperialism lead to people moving across the globe? We'll get into where people went wrong with that one in a second. And then this one is explain, again, a how and a why issue. One way in which imperialism affected the development of the domestic economies of imperial state. Again, how did imperialism cause developments or impact the economies of imperial state? We'll get into that in a little bit more in a second here, okay? So here are some correct answers from the College Board, right? I don't love all of these, but what I do want to point out to you is if you look at them, you can see a couple of characteristics. Number one, in most of these, I can see a vocabulary word, right? These are not broad generalities, but there is something specific here. Secondly, what you can see here is that there is some sort of cause and effect relationship that is either explicit or inferred, okay? let me also point out that these are about colonial societies. Many students misread that first one, weren't careful, and start talking about the economic benefits that a country like Great Britain would have had because of this, right? So look at the first one. Colonizers sometimes developed export economies and cash crops, such as rubber or palm oil, right? So if you stop there, that is not, it has not answered how colonial territories benefited, right? In this case, though, it goes on. In colonial territories, that provided some economic benefits to some groups within colonial societies. Would I love to hear words like, you know, the elites or the people that manufactured those? Yeah, I'd always like more detail. I'd always like more evidence, but this gets you there, right? Because the vocabulary terms, let's see, the vocabulary terms are up here, right? With terms like cash crops, right? Cash crops, and then, right, the thing that I am always on you folks about, right? Then they named them, such as rubber or palm oil. At this point, a reader is like, okay, they know something specific. Can they connect it? Yes, right? If it just said colonizers sometimes developed, you know, crops that some groups benefited from, that's not going to get you there, right? Because it talks about, there's another vocabulary word there, right? In some cases, colonial societies could use the profits from raw material exports to purchase manufactured goods. What you see in most of these is a variation of the idea that in imperialism, from the colonial side, from the colonizer side, this was an attempt to find new markets and extract raw materials. You just have to find the benefit. Okay? Imperialism often resulted in, let me point that out to you, right? That is talking about an effect. Okay? It led to railways and telegraph systems, but do I know how it benefited them yet? No, right? It helped better integrate the economies. I think what a lot of folks miss here is they miss that the question is a cause and effect, and even in the description, they don't give you a cause, they don't tell you the effect. Okay. Talks about the effect here, right? Some individuals were able to improve their own family's wealth by migrating to imperial metropoles, cities, right? Don't love that one. This one kind of relates. This one here kind of relates to this one. But again, look at the cause and effect. British imperialism in India and Egypt, again, right? Vocabulary words, led to the construction of railway networks or railroad networks. And, right, so it's giving you a second one, right? The Suez Canal in Egypt. It talks about the integration into the global economy. Again, it is talking to you about an effect, right? This one's kind of interesting, right? Opium producers. So these are people who are making opium in South Asia, right? In Afghanistan. They benefited economically from economic imperialism in China, right? Because they had some place to sell their opium to, right? Normally, we wouldn't argue that the British being drug dealers is a good idea. In this case, right? It did benefit some people. Where does this one get you over the top, right? Some merchants. Let me pause on this one to point out, guys, is when you're looking at positives and negatives, right? Nothing is ever all good or all bad, right? Even in imperialism in Africa, for example, some people benefited. How did they benefit? Some merchants benefited by cooperating with European companies that extracted and sold natural resources. But again, this such as palm oil and diamonds is what gets you over the top, right, guys? And I think it's the one thing you gotta remember to do. I don't think enough of you do it, right? Incorrect samples. These are samples from a few students, right? One economic benefit from imperialism was the increase of exported goods from export economies to make more money. Problem is who are these export economies? I have no idea. Are you talking about Great Britain here and Germany? Are you talking about imperial nations, or are you talking about the export of cash crops, right? You're leaving it to the reader to figure out what you mean here, because you lack anything specific, right? One economic benefit of colonial territories from imperialism was, all right, the increase of goods they could sell and trade, which made them lots of money. Who are them? Who does it make? Everybody? What are the goods? Right? Again, broad generality that has kind of the main idea right, but I'm looking for the word, right? Cash crops that made those farmers more money. Right? You've got the right idea, but the lack of anything specific here, the reader is going to look at and go, yeah, probably not. One economic benefit that colonial territories derived from imperialism was, right? So let me point out here what's great. A couple of these. You guys are doing the thing I taught you, which is to repeat the stem back. But look at what you're right, because this doesn't make sense, right? Was that the English East India Company, which supplied the English with textiles, which made the English economy rise. That is an impact of imperialism generally on colonizers or Western imperial nations. It's not what the question is asking you. And sometimes you want to pause, look what you wrote, and say, does that make sense? Same thing here. Describe one way in which imperialism contributed to global migrations. Okay, so the cause is imperialism, the effect is global migration, and you just have to describe how that worked. Okay, from the College Board. The growing wealth of imperial societies, industrial imperial societies, and poverty in colonial societies frequently encouraged many colonial populations to relocate. Right? So what do I see here? Right? I see the idea of growing wealth in imperial societies. I see poverty in colonial societies, and I see how it led them to relocate. Again, love to see things like such as. The development of plantation economies, that's the vocabulary words, right? In colonized territories, created demand for the migration of indentured laborers from places like India and China. That is a great answer, right? We get the term plantation economy, we get the term indentured laborers, we get India and China, right? And both of these sentences, again, are a description of a cause and effect. Great Britain's possession of Australia facilitated, helped, right? That's a cause and effect word. Right? The establishment of penal colonies, there's the terminology, that were filled with British and Irish convicts, right? Because imperialism would lead to the control of this nation, right? And having control of Australia helped the British find some place to send their criminals. In transportation, but we have the specific place, Australia, we have the vocabulary term penal colonies, and we have a cause and effect relationship. Okay. One way in which imperialism contributed to global migrations in the 19th century was by the Dutch East India Company, driving the Portuguese out of the islands around Java. Now, no, it's not really the right time. Okay. The Portuguese had to go to different places and new people. The Dutch were introduced to Java and kept more coming. I mean, are you talking about a settler colony here? You know, you've got to be careful, guys, with the time. The question is in the 19th century. This is not going on in the 19th century. This is in the previous period. Okay, we're talking about the US, we're talking about manifest destiny. I don't believe that's imperialism. I'm not a US historian, but I don't feel like the westward expansion of the US is American imperialism. I don't think that this would be taken. Now, maybe an American historian would tell me I'm wrong here. Maybe the Native Americans would argue that, yes, this is a form of imperialism. But I'm struggling to see that that is the correct answer for that. I think you have to be careful when you write about America. Yeah, you just need to be careful. I underline technology here. This is where a lot of people went wrong. Okay, imperialism contributed to global migration as there was new technology and more economic opportunity. A lot of people wrote about steamships and everything, but instead of saying how imperialism led to this, the forces of imperialism, they were talking about technological advancements. And I'm going to argue with you that that is not what the question is asking, right? And if you go back to the previous one, right, all of those are arguing that these are the forces of imperialism. I think you could slide technological improvements that also helped facilitate global migration, right? But if we go back here, you're going to see that if we go back one, we're going to see that none of this has anything to do with technology, right? This is, if we're arguing that imperialism is the major factor that leads to it, yeah, I understand that we're probably not getting, people to Australia or people being able to migrate as efficiently and effectively without the technology, but that is not the major causing force, right? Let's see if I can't get to the next screen. All right, so the last one, explain. It means give a reason, one specific way in which imperialism affected the development. How did imperialism affect the development of domestic? Okay, let's stop here. A number of you went in to talk about women. You saw the word domestic. And I get it. I understand how you look at it that way. But in this case, that's not what it means, right? Domestic economy would mean, if we're talking about the domestic economy of the United States, we're talking about the internal economy of the United States, not its economy in relationship to a larger global economy, okay, of imperial states, right? A number of you flipped this with A, right? You need to be careful and make sure you know what you're talking about, right? If you're doing it in class, right, I want you to ask. On the exam, you won't have the ability to, so you really need to make sure you know what you're talking about here, right? So again, do I see cause and effect relationships here? Okay, but you're also looking for an explain, so you're looking for a how and why, right? Imperialism helped imperial states expand their wealth and develop and maintain industrial economies. All right, so I'm going to pause here. A number of you tried to make the claim that imperialism caused the Industrial Revolution. It's in the wrong order. Imperialism is an outgrowth of the Industrial Revolution. And if you look at the language here, right, develop and maintain is what works. By giving them access to natural resources and colonies that could be used, and that's where the explanation is, in the factories of imperial societies. It's a great answer, right? Expand their wealth and develop, talks about factories, it answers the how and why question. Okay. Industrialized Western states developed imperialist economic systems that gave merchants and companies from the colonizing countries significant advantages and profits in colonial territories. Now, in this case, as a reader, boy, I would love to see, like, for example, De Beers and diamonds in South Africa, right? Or right, if we're talking about new transnational corporations, that terms like HSBC, right from the key concepts or the historical developments. Imperialism allowed the economies of imperial states to grow by exploiting the raw materials of colonial territories and developing markets for their manufactured products. In many cases, this is the historic development. Right? This is an acceptable answer. Would I like to see something more complicated? Yes. But what is the impact on imperial states? It allowed their economies to grow. How are they able to grow? By exploiting raw materials and developing markets for their existing manufactured products. Right? Same concept here. Great Britain's development into an industrial economy was greatly aided by its ability to acquire cotton cheaply from India and Egypt and sell finished products to its colonial territories. Now, this is a really good one here, right? I've got India and Egypt. I've got cotton cheaply, right? This is a development that goes on throughout the Industrial Revolution. It just doesn't say that imperialism helped cause it, right? It is making a solid argument, right, that the economy was aided, right, by access to these raw materials, right? And then goes on to say, and sell those to colonial territories. Again, with this one, the industrialization of economies of imperial states, France, Germany, Belgium, was aided by the ability of those states to acquire raw materials from their college. You can see repeats here from the College Board with these. It's kind of interesting. I'm sure there are other correct answers out there. What are some incorrect answers? Again, if you look at the way students are answering this, the domestic economies were affected as instead of farming for themselves, they farmed for cash crops. Already, you're talking about the wrong place. Okay, you're not answering the correct question. You're looking back to A. I think you need to be careful with these. Again, it forced the colonies to rely on export and thus weakened the economy, right? In my, this student labeled this, right? Labeled it C, fine, right? They'd already gotten the A point, right? Since this product could change in demand, these colonies were forced to rely on the whims of consumers, right? If they already got the A point, right, none of this matters to me, okay? Because you're not answering C, right? On the other hand, the imperial states vastly benefited from expanded trading ports and the ability to trade globally. How and why? I just don't see how. I see it there vaguely, right? Maybe if a reader was in a good mood, maybe. But it's just not enough to get you there. All right, guys. I'm going to stop this and then do the other one. So I have two separate things going on here. All right. If you have any questions, just post them, message me on this, or post it on school.